Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight? Aha! Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and today's case is something else, to be honest. In the last few years, true crime podcasting has gotten a bit of a bad rap, depending on which podcast you listen to. But there are a handful of investigative podcasts that have led to the arrest and subsequent convictions for cases that might have otherwise remained cold and unsolved. And today's case is one of those cases that saw a break in the case due to a podcast. That podcast is called Up and Vanished. Of course, I had heard of the podcast before, but when I heard that one of the persons who was arrested in that case joined the military after the crime, I knew I had to tell you the story here. Additionally, this case came back to my recollection very recently. There is an A&E TV show called Taking the Stand, and I actually participated in one of their episodes. If you go look up the TV show Taking the Stand and you look up the case of DeMarcus Little, which I believe is season 4, you will see your girl Margot right there in the flesh. So I was catching up on my episodes of Taking the Stand when I came across the episode on Ryan Duke. That case refreshed my recollection on the case I'm about to tell you today. So without further delay, let's get into it. Join me today as I tell you the tragic story of Tara Grinstead. I've titled this episode, Who Killed Tara Grinstead? Because even though the case is resolved, we still don't know who did it. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Tara Faye Grinstead was born in rural Georgia in 1974, and she grew up with big dreams. By her late 20s, she had earned a master's degree in education, and she was teaching 11th grade history at Irwin County High School in Osceola, Georgia. Osceola is a very small, tight-knit town of just a few thousand people, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. And Tara was not only well-known in the community, she was adored. She had been a beauty pageant queen, and she'd actually won the title of Miss Tifton in 1999, and she even competed in the competition to become Miss Georgia. And she brought that same kind of poise and dedication to her career as an educator. Tara was an overachiever by all accounts. She rose through the ranks at the high school, and she even became an assistant principal in addition to teaching high school or to teaching history. She had ambitions of one day becoming a principal herself. Tara mentored young girls in the pageant circuit. She helped with their hair and their makeup, and she was a role model for many of her students. In fact, just days before she vanished, or actually the day of or the day before she vanished, Tara had hosted some of her pageant students at her very home to help them get ready for a local competition. The principal of her school would later say, quote, "This is someone with a tremendous magnetic personality, and the kids just love her," end quote. Tara was the kind of person who never missed work without calling ahead, and who was always there for her family and her friends. So in late October 2005, when 30-year-old Tara Grinstead didn't show up for work on a Monday morning, people immediately knew that something was wrong. It was Monday, October 24th, 2005, a normal fall morning, and Tara simply failed to show up for work. I should add that Tara's mom knew that something was amiss when she tried to call Tara on Sunday and she didn't answer. But let's continue. That Monday, Tara was a no-call, no-show, and this was completely out of character for her. Tara's coworkers and friends, they phoned her off the hook, and by mid-morning, after not hearing from Tara, they requested a welfare check by the police. As everyone put their heads together, they reported that Tara was last seen on Saturday night, and it was now Monday morning. So the Osceola Police Chief, Billy Hancock, along with other officers, went to Tara's house to see what was going on. And when the authorities arrived at her house, it was a small, single-story house, they found some things that were normal and other things that kind of sent chills down their spines. The first thing that was abnormal was that Tara's car, a black Chevrolet, was still parked in the driveway. If Tara had gone somewhere on her own, she almost certainly would have taken her own vehicle. The fact that it was sitting in her carport at home meant that she hadn't driven off anywhere, or at the very least that she hadn't returned home from what she was doing that weekend. Police approached the front door and they noticed a business card wedged in the doorframe. It looked like someone, maybe a visitor, had left their card at the door. Near the front door steps, they also noticed something strange, a latex glove lying in the middle of the front lawn. It was one of those small disposable gloves, the kind that you might wear when you're cleaning or, for handling evidence. Finding a single latex glove just sitting in the yard of a person who is now missing, well, that definitely caught the officers' attention. Now, the officers were able to gain entry into Tara's home with a spare key that she had left with a neighbor. And inside, officers found that the door was locked, and once inside, there were no obvious signs of a break-in. Everything was fairly orderly at first glance. There was no overturned furniture, no broken windows, there was no blood anywhere. But as they looked closer, they started to see these subtle signs that something was off. Tara's cell phone, for one, was found inside the house, plugged into the charger as if she had left it there charging overnight. Her bedroom also showed a little bit of an odd scene. The clothes that Tara had worn that Saturday, before she went missing, they were piled on the floor of her bedroom. Tara was known to be a pretty tidy person, and her friends reported that she wouldn't just typically leave her clothes thrown about. On top of that, a lamp on her bedside table was knocked over and broken. There was a bedside alarm clock that was usually on the nightstand, and it was now found under the bed, and it turned out that it had been switched off for about 6 hours. Now, these little subtle details hinted that there was some kind of disturbance in that bedroom, even if the rest of the house, basically looked normal. But outside of the broken lamp, the weird placement of the alarm clock, and clothes on the floor, there was no blood, there was no signs of a struggle. There was one additional oddity, though. Tara's purse and her keys were missing from inside the house. This suggested that Tara, maybe she left with someone that she knew, but if she did, who? Investigators then turned to Tara's car for clues, and right off the bat, there was something very strange. The driver's seat was pushed further back. Now, Tara was pretty petite, so who, that's the question, who drove her car? It clearly wasn't her. And yet another strange thing, an envelope full of cash that Tara had won at a pageant was just sitting in the car. If someone had come to rob Tara, why would they leave an envelope of money just sitting there untouched? That detail was perplexing. For whatever reason, Osceola police immediately called in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI, and they wanted them to take over the case that very day, or they took over the case that very day. That Monday and the days that followed, there was a massive search effort kicked off around Osceola. Hundreds of volunteers, including Irwin County High School students and teachers, joined law enforcement to comb the area for any sign of Tara. They searched on foot, they used dogs, and they even had helicopters scanning from above. This was the largest search that many local officials had ever been a part of. The community was in pure panic. Tara was one of their own, and in this small town, the idea that someone could vanish, just like simply vanish into thin air, was almost unthinkable. In those initial days, investigators started piecing together a timeline of Tara's last known movements. They discovered that on Saturday, October 22nd, 2005, which was 2 days before she was reported missing, Tara had spent a busy day involved in beauty pageant activities. Tara had been coaching some young girls in a local pageant earlier that day, as was her passion, and that evening, Tara actually went over to a barbecue that was just a few blocks away from her house. Several friends and neighbors saw her at this cookout. She was last seen leaving the barbecue at around 10:30 p.m. on Saturday night, and that from there, she was simply heading home. We know that she made it home because the clothes that she was seen wearing at the barbecue were on her bedroom floor when investigators looked. That meant that she got home and at least was able to change out of those clothes. And it was at this point where investigators think that it was after she got home and after she changed that something terrible happened to Tara. By Monday, she was gone. Naturally, police began looking into anyone in Tara's life who might have had a reason to hurt her. And in a disappearance case, especially of a woman, you often start scrutinizing those closest to the victim, often a current or a former romantic partner. And Tara had a somewhat complicated romantic history that gave investigators a few names to consider. The first person that police looked at was Tara's ex-boyfriend, a man named Marcus. Marcus was an Army Ranger and a former Ocilla police officer who had dated Tara on and off for about 6 years. They met in 1999 and that was the same year that she had won Miss Tifton, and their relationship was known to be a little bit tumultuous. They had broken up not long before Tara went missing. In fact, Marcus had reportedly ended their relationship for good just 2 weeks prior to her disappearance. Friends say that Tara was heartbroken over the split. She was very much in love with Marcus, and she struggled a little bit with the breakup. According to Marcus, about a week before she vanished, so it was a week after they broke up and a week before she vanished, Tara had showed up at his house begging for him to take her back. He even claimed that at some point she said something that caught him off guard. It was alarming. And what she said was that if she ever saw him with another woman, that she would take her own life. Now, wait a minute. Tara's friends and family, they strongly disputed that Tara would ever have seriously threatened suicide over a man. They believed that Marcus was exaggerating or misrepresenting Tara's despair. And indeed, investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a suicide. Still, Marcus, as the recently spurred ex-boyfriend, I don't even know that he was spurred because he was the one that broke up with her, but he was scrutinized intensely. People who knew about the breakup wondered if maybe Marcus could have become angry or jealous about something. Maybe he went to her house, maybe he confronted her, maybe he did something to her. But when questioned, Marcus had a solid alibi. Marcus said that on the night that Tara went missing, Saturday night, he had been out at a bar with a buddy of his, a former police colleague, and they looked into it and the alibi checked out. Witnesses and evidence confirmed that Marcus was in fact at the bar that night, and there was no indication that he left to sneak over to Tara's house. Although we never know what he did after he left the bar, right? Investigators also noted that there was no history of violence in Marcus and Tara's relationship that they knew of. Maybe this was a tough breakup, but nothing indicated to them that he would be the one to harm her. In the end, Marcus was never charged with anything related to Tara's disappearance, and for the most part, law enforcement considered his alibi to be pretty credible. Another person who came on the police's radar was a man named Anthony Vickers, one of Tara's former high school students. So Tara, she had this soft spot for helping troubled youth, and Anthony was one that she had taken under her wing. He had some behavioral issues, and Tara tried to mentor him and keep him on track. Unfortunately, though, Anthony apparently became infatuated with Tara. In March of 2005, about 7 months before she vanished, Anthony showed up at her house late one night and caused a scene. He was banging on her door and her window, yelling for her to come out and saying that he wasn't going to go anywhere. Tara, who was inside with a male friend, was so frightened that she filed a police report about the incident. Anthony was promptly arrested outside of her house for disorderly conduct, but nothing much ever came about it beyond that just being a very scary incident for Tara. But at this point, when Tara disappeared in October, investigators immediately thought back to Anthony right away. given, his obsession with her. Could he have come back? Could he have tried to confront her again? Could he have waited outside of her house? Like, what could have happened? They eventually questioned Anthony and looked into his whereabouts that weekend. In the end, they couldn't find any solid evidence tying him to Tara's disappearance. Whatever his issues were, there was nothing linking him to that night, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. And then there was the mysterious business card left at Tara's front door. Remember that when I said that when the cops got there, there was like a business card wedged in the door? Well, police tracked down the man whose name was on that card, and it turned out that that man was a married police officer from a nearby town. My implication from this research was that Tara may have been involved with this married police officer. When investigators checked Tara's answering machine, remember, this is 2005, so yes, answering machines were still a thing, they discovered that on the day that Tara went missing, or the next day, that Saturday, the man, the married police officer, had left her approximately 20 voicemail messages. Excuse me? 20 plus calls in one day certainly suggested an interest in reaching her, but why so many times? But the man, who remains unnamed, had contacted Tara allegedly that many times because when Tara's mom couldn't reach her that Sunday, Mom called this man and was like, hey, have you been able to reach Tara? Can you go check on her? The man then drove over an hour from where he lived to check on Tara after she failed to respond to his calls. Nonetheless, this married man was still very suspicious and high on the suspect list. But when questioned, the officer denied any involvement in Tara's disappearance. And ultimately, while it looked bad that he was married and potentially dating this woman who went missing, investigators couldn't pin anything on him either. He had an alibi for at least part of that day, and there was no evidence of foul play on his part. For a very long time, though, all of these men remained persons of interest. As days turned into weeks, the investigation struggled and rumors ran wild. In 2008, about 3 years after Tara vanished, the case did get a burst of renewed national attention. You see, CBS's 48 Hours featured Tara's case in an episode titled Stolen Beauty, and they were drawing parallels between Tara's disappearance and a similar case out of Orlando, Florida. It was in that 2008 48 Hours special that the GBI revealed one of their biggest pieces of physical evidence to the public for the very first time. And that piece of evidence was that latex glove from Tara's yard. Lab analysts had worked some magic on that glove, and at first glance, you'd think that recovering DNA from the inside of a latex glove would be unlikely. How do you even get touch DNA off of something like that? But amazingly, the Georgia State Crime Lab did manage to pull DNA off of the glove. And in addition to DNA, they also pulled off a fingerprint. The DNA profile indicated that it was from a male, and investigators were sure that whoever had worn that glove had to be connected to Tara's disappearance. They believed this DNA was the key to solving the case. And I do want to add that Tara's DNA was also on the glove, which is why it was such a crucial clue to the case, and which is why they thought it was connected to her disappearance. Well, when the crime lab ran the unknown male DNA profile against the people in Tara's life, former boyfriends, former students, coworkers, the usual suspects, none of them matched. They compared it to about 100 men who were even remotely tied to the case. They were kind of like in the area during the time she went missing. They ran that again also. They also ran it through state and national DNA databases, expecting maybe to get a hit if the person had a criminal record, for example. But guess what? There were no hits. That meant that whoever's DNA was on that glove had never been arrested for a felony, at least up to that point, and that person was not already in any type of system. This was a huge frustration for the investigators. They literally had the genetic fingerprint or genetic DNA and the fingerprint of someone who was likely involved in Tara's disappearance, but there was no name to go with it. That is frustrating. After that 48 Hours episode, tips continued to trickle in here and there, but nothing concrete ever materialized. In fact, a bizarre curveball came in 2009. There was some random guy on the internet who was posting saying, I'm a serial killer. I've killed 16 women. Oh, and by the way, Tara was one of the women I killed. Eventually, they found out who the guy was, and turned out the entire thing was a hoax. The years kept passing, and Tara's case became the largest case file in Georgia state history for a missing person. There were hundreds of interviews conducted, acres upon acres of land that was searched, and a standing reward, which eventually reached $100,000 for information. Tara's family suffered immensely during this time. Her father and stepmother held out hope for years that Tara might still be alive somewhere. But by 2010, Tara was legally declared dead in absentia. Tragically, Tara's mother, Faye, passed away in 2008 of natural causes, never knowing exactly what happened to her daughter. I mean, this case took a toll on everyone. So let's fast forward a decade. By 2015, 10 full years had passed since Tara disappeared, and the trail was ice cold. Officially, the GBI, they were like, yeah, we're still working on it, but there was no publicly known progress. Many people feared that the case might never be solved, that it would become just another unsolved mystery in the United States. But then, in 2016, something interesting happened that would completely change the trajectory of this case. The story of Tara Grinstead caught the attention of a budding filmmaker and a podcaster named Payne Lindsey. Payne Lindsey decided to investigate Tara's cold case as the subject of his new true crime podcast that he was creating called Up and Vanished. The first season of Up and Vanished premiered in 2016, and it focused entirely on Tara's disappearance. Now, at the time, true crime podcasts were really exploding in popularity. Think Serial. And Up and Vanished quickly gained a massive following. Payne Lindsey wasn't an investigator or a journalist by training, but he had a knack for digging into small-town mysteries and getting people to talk, because it's a small town and people love talking. His podcast, Up and Vanished, started shining a spotlight on all of the unresolved questions, the possible suspects, the overlooked clues in Tara's case, and importantly, it got people in Osceola talking again. For the first time in a decade, Tara's case was in the public consciousness in a big way. The podcast was downloaded millions of times, and it put a lot of pressure on anyone who might know something to come forward. Investigators later credited Up and Vanished with helping shake loose new information in the case. The GBI said that the publicity reignited interest in Tara's case and generated fresh leads. One of those tips would prove to be the break that everyone had been waiting for. By early 2017, more than 11 years after Tara Grinstead went missing, rumors were swirling that a big announcement in the case was coming. Someone had apparently come forward with information, and it was something big. The GBI held a press conference on February 23, 2017, and the news they delivered was absolutely shocking. An arrest had been made in connection with Tara's disappearance. The person arrested for Tara's murder was 33-year-old Ryan Alexander Duke. Ryan was from Osceola and had actually been a student at Irwin County High School, which was the very high school where Tara taught. In fact, Ryan Duke had graduated from that high school in 2002. Shout out to class of 2002. I am a grad of 2002 as well. Anyway, so it was just a few years before Tara went missing when this guy, who was now arrested for her murder, had graduated high school. At first, many people wondered if Ryan Duke was related to another name that started to circulate around the case as well, and that guy's name was Bo Dukes, with an S at the end. But Ryan wasn't related to Bo. Duke and Dukes was just a confusing coincidence. So we'll get to Bo Dukes in a minute, though, because he was the second arrest in this case. Yes, this case does get really crazy and really involved. When Ryan Duke's name hit the news, even Tara's colleagues and friends were floored. Ryan had never once come up in law enforcement's radar in all of these years. He wasn't one of her exes, he wasn't one of her students, or he at least wasn't the student that came banging on her door. He wasn't the married cop. He was just some dude who had once attended the school and then more or less just kind of like faded in the background of life. To the community and even to investigators, this arrest came completely out of left field. Tara's sister Anita said it's unreal. She knew Ryan's family casually, but never in a million years connected him to Tara. So who is Ryan Duke and how did he get implicated after all of these years? Well, it turns out that Ryan had allegedly told someone about his involvement and gotten another person involved. And then that secret finally reached the ears of law enforcement. According to the GBI, there was a tipster who came forward in early 2017 with critical information. That tipster was a woman named Brooke Sheridan, a young woman who was dating Bo Dukes at the time. Bo Dukes was a friend and former classmate. He actually was a former classmate and a former roommate of Ryan Duke. They actually graduated high school together. Brooke, Bo's girlfriend, later gave an interview explaining what happened. Bo had confided in her that back in 2005, on the night that Tara disappeared, his friend Ryan Duke had killed Tara. Bo told Brooke that Ryan showed up at his house freaking out because, remember, they were roommates. Ryan shows up freaking out, saying that he had accidentally killed Tara during a botched robbery of her house and that he needed Bo's help to dispose of the body. Bo admitted to Brooke that he helped Ryan destroy Tara's body to cover up the entire crime, specifically that he had burned her body in a remote pecan orchard owned by Bo's family. What? Now, let that sink in. You can imagine Brooke's shock when she heard this coming from her boyfriend's lips. She later said, "I felt like I was gonna be sick." She says she didn't even know who she was staring at, and she didn't know who he was at this moment when he's confessing that he helped to dispose of a body. She struggled immensely with this knowledge, but ultimately, Brooke decided that no matter how it might affect her relationship, she had to do the right thing. With that, she went to the GBI with what she knew in early 2017. In her words, she realized that the peace of mind of Tara's family was way more important than Bo's freedom. She even confronted Bo directly, and she was like, dude, you have to come clean. Like, you have to confess to what you've done for the sake of Tara's family. And Bo Dukes apparently agreed. Within days of Brooke's tip, GBI agents interviewed Bo Dukes, and Bo did indeed spill the basics of the story. And he implicated Ryan Duke as the one who killed Tara and admitted his own role in helping to dispose of the body. Armed with this information and armed with something else. You remember the DNA in the glove? Well, the fingerprint and the DNA on that glove belonged to Ryan Duke. So armed with this information, GBI arrested Ryan Duke on February 23rd, 2017, and they charged him with Tara's murder. According to the arrest warrant read in court, the investigators believed that on the night of October 22nd, 2005, Ryan Duke had broken into Tara's house while she was out, allegedly to steal money to fund his drug habit, and that when Tara came home and caught him in the act, he attacked and strangled her with his hands. Which, break, I'm thinking about this now, it doesn't necessarily make sense that she would have caught him like right then and there in the act because she was able to get home and change out of her clothes. But it's possible that the man hid, Tara was able to change into her clothes, and then while he was trying to leave, she caught him. Anyway, the warrant additionally said that Ryan used his hands to kill Tara in the moment of panic. After killing her, Ryan then allegedly took Tara's body out of the house. The warrant didn't detail what happened next, but we know from Bo's confession that Ryan allegedly enlisted Bo's help and they drove Tara's body out to a rural pecan orchard in the neighboring Ben Hill County. That orchard, as it turns out, and I think I already said this, was owned by Bo Duke's uncle. There, in the orchard, they put Tara's body on a wood pile and burned her remains to ash in an attempt to destroy evidence. About a week and a half after Ryan's arrest on March 3rd, 2017, the GBI publicly announced a second arrest in the case, Bo Dukes. They charged him with helping to conceal Tara's death and lying to investigators. Bo was not, however, charged with murder, but rather with the crimes of covering up the crime, concealing a death, tampering with evidence, and hindering the apprehension of a criminal. Essentially, he was accused of being an accessory after the fact, the guy who helped get rid of the body and then kept this horrible secret for 12 years. Bo Dukes was 32 at the time of his arrest, and as I mentioned, he'd been a former classmate and friend of Ryan Duke. They'd been partying buddies back in 2005. And just to reiterate, no, Bo Dukes and Ryan Dukes are not related, despite the confusingly similar last names. After the arrest, the Ocilla community was stunned. These two men had been living among them the entire time. Ryan Duke had actually remained in Ocilla for a while after 2005, though by 2017, I believe he was living in a nearby town, not necessarily Ocilla. And Bo Dukes had also moved on with life. He even served in the U.S. Army for a stint. He joined about a year after the murder, and he had gotten married. We later learned that Bo had a bit of a criminal history too, including a 2013 conviction for stealing $150,000 worth of Army property. And in addition to that, years after that, he was charged with 2 rapes, but I'll get more into that in a second. The whole point is that neither Ryan nor Bo had ever been publicly suspected in Tara's case prior to this, which is why the community was stunned. However, in a truly jaw-dropping twist, information later emerged suggesting that the Dukes, Duke with no S and Duke with an S, that their names had come up very early on in Tara's disappearance and then got lost in the shuffle. In fact, court documents would later reveal that back in November of 2005, which is no kidding, just like a week after Tara went missing, someone reported to law enforcement that Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes had been at a party bragging about killing Tara and burning her body. Yes, you heard that correctly. Apparently, a tip was called in to the Irwin County Sheriff in 2005 that these two schmucks had essentially confessed at a party. Now, if that is true, if there is actually a note in the file that says that this was a tip, it means that the authorities had a huge lead early on, and for reasons unknown, it fell through the cracks. Because remember, these guys had not been investigated or interviewed back when the investigation was hot and heavy. But wait, it was also revealed that a year or so after Tara's disappearance, Bo Dukes had joined the military. During the holiday season, after joining the military, he took leave and he brought home one of his Army buddies. There was a huge sign in Ocilla with Tara's face and basically saying, like, have you seen her? Do you know what happened? Contact this number. And the Army buddy asked Bo Dukes about it, like, hey, like, what's the deal with that, like, that girl? She's like so pretty and she's missing. Like, what's going on? Well, not right away, but a few days later, Bo Dukes later told his Army buddy that he was very familiar with the missing persons case because his friend had killed Tara and recruited him to dispose of her body, and he did participate. Now, this Army buddy was very perplexed. He was like, a WTF, like, what do I do? And he wasn't one of those people that just didn't do anything. He actually reported what Bo had told him to authorities, but no one ever called him. He actually says that he would continue to call back to say, like, hey, what's going on? I gave this tip. He even told his wife, like, what should I do? I want to help out. And it wasn't until a decade later that someone actually called him back. Crazy, right? Well, because of all of this, a Georgia Court of Appeals later determined that law enforcement likely had probable cause by late November 2005 to suspect Ryan and Bo based on these tips that they had received. Now, we may never know why investigators didn't follow up, but it's disturbing to think that Tara's case could possibly have been solved within weeks or even months instead of dragging on for decades. Now, after the arrest in 2017, the focus shifted to building the legal case against Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes. We do know that around the time of Ryan's arrest, he did speak with investigators. In fact, Ryan Duke confessed. He confessed in detail to GBI agents in 2017, providing his story about breaking in for drug money, being startled by Tara and killing her, then burning her remains with Bo's help. His confession lined up perfectly or very closely with what Bo had told them. Ryan even led investigators to the pecan orchard where they had allegedly burned Tara's body. Now, the GBI spent several days in February of 2017 searching that orchard, digging and sifting through ashes. They did find scorched bone fragments on the property, but unfortunately, the fragments were so badly burned that DNA tests could not conclusively identify them as Tara's. Sadly, there would be no intact body to recover. Tara's remains were essentially lost to the fire. But the circumstantial evidence was very compelling. And it was compelling that it was her. They led her to this exact spot in the orchard, and it did reveal that it was a human, but they just couldn't identify whose remains they belonged to. And if they didn't belong to her, it's even scarier because who did they belong to, right? And so there were pieces of fabric, though, that were believed to be from the clothing that she had been wearing. And those pieces of fabric were actually in that burn pile. With both Ryan and Bo now formally charged, their cases proceeded through the courts. Bo Dukes, who admitted to his role in the cover-up, actually ended up being tried first. Bo's case was simpler in a sense because he wasn't accused of murder, just of being an accessory after the fact, right? His trial took place in March of 2019, and his trial took place in Wilcox County. And the evidence against him was pretty overwhelming. You had Brooke Sheridan testifying about his confession to her. You had the GBI agents testifying about Bo's admission and how he led them to the burn site. Now, Bo did not deny his involvement. In fact, at his trial, he expressed extreme remorse. He actually took the stand and apologized, saying, "I was a coward, I was selfish, I can't undo what I did, I'm so sorry, yada, yada, yada. I failed Tara's family, I failed my family." You know, essentially he was like, I should have come forward sooner, but I didn't. Mea culpa, here I am, do what you gotta do. And with that, the jury found Bo Dukes guilty on all charges related to the cover-up. Remember, he was not charged with murder. For his involvement, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The judge at Bo's sentencing, however, did not mince word. He noted that Bo had served in the army and even then betrayed his duty by stealing from the military, and that Bo's actions in Tara's case were a profound betrayal of his community. Bo Dukes was let off to start serving that 25-year sentence, and as of this recording, he remains in state prison. I do want to add, just off the cuff, I didn't put this in my script originally, but I did want to add that he was subsequently, I believe it was in 2023, he was convicted of 2 sexual assault charges, which were the lesser of the rape charges he was originally charged with. And those were for crimes committed in 2017, which is insane. So he did get 10 years, but those 10 years are to serve at the same, he's to serve the 10 years and the 25 years for Tara's case at the same time. So he'll have to just serve a full 25 years. Ryan Duke, on the other hand, still had to face a murder trial. And this is where the case takes another yet unbelievable turn. Ryan's trial was delayed for a long time. It was like legal wranglings, and then it was the pandemic, and it was just all of these things that kind of went into it. His trial didn't take place until May of 2022, which was over 5 years after his arrest and 17 years after Tara's death. And the thing about this case is that by the time his trial was taking place, the public interest in this case was like sky high, right? With Tara's case having been covered on numerous national outlets, and of course on not only the Up and Vanish podcast, but on so many other really famous podcasts as well. When Ryan Duke had been arrested in 2017, everyone assumed the case was closed. He confessed, there was DNA evidence linking to him, case closed. Yeah, like that's it. Put him in jail, throw away the key. You know, it is what it is. But by the time we got to trial, Ryan Duke had completely recanted his confession, and he had changed his story completely. In a move that shocked a lot of observers, Ryan actually took the witness stand in his own defense during the trial, which is relatively rare in murder cases, which, by the way, you have to watch A&E's Taking the Stand, this case in particular, but also the one I participated in, because that entire series is about defendants who take the stand in their own defense. And you will see this case there if you watch it. So Ryan decided to tell his version of events to the jury in open court, under oath. And according to Ryan Duke's testimony, he didn't kill Tara Grinstead at all. Instead, Ryan claimed that the real murderer was Bo Dukes, and that Ryan's 2017 confession was a false confession, a lie that he had told because he was afraid of Bo and was struggling with a drug addiction at the time he confessed. He also said police tactics caused him to confess falsely. What in the world is going on in this case? So here's the story that Ryan told at trial. He said that on the night of October 22nd, 2005, he was passed out from drugs and alcohol at his mobile home that he shared with Bo Dukes. When all of a sudden, Bo Dukes woke him up. He shook him awake. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I killed Tara. You need to help me." Ryan claimed that Bo dragged him into this entire thing against his will. Bo allegedly showed Ryan Tara's purse and his keys as proof that he had been in her house and that he had done something terrible. Then Bo took Ryan out to see Tara's body, implying that Bo had killed her on his own and that Bo asked Ryan to help get rid of the body. So at this point, the story is completely flipping. He did the killing. I helped dispose of the body. Which is crazy. Now, Ryan testified that he was scared of Bo, but felt he had no choice, so he went along with it. According to Ryan, the two of them transported Tara's body to the pecan orchard and together burned her remains until nothing was left. Ryan admitted that, yes, he helped dispose of Tara's body and lied to police about it for all these years, but that was the only thing that he was guilty of. He wasn't guilty of murder. And he also flat out denied that he broke into Tara's house and that he harmed her. He claimed that his confession in 2017 was made under the influence of drugs. He mentioned that he was withdrawing from painkillers at the time and that Bo had threatened him. So he thought if he took the fall, Bo might not hurt him. Like, okay, well, if I tell them that I was the one that killed her, like, Bo's going to be fine. Like, well, if you tell them that Bo did it, Bo will be in jail, so you'll be fine because he's not going to be able to hurt you. But anyway, the entire point of his testimony is that the real killer was Bo Dukes. Now, you might be thinking, how does that square with the evidence? Because if Ryan's news story is true, Bo Dukes is a stone cold killer who let his friend take the blame, which, okay, people do that all the time. But recall, Ryan's DNA was found in the glove that was found outside of Tara's house. Well, of course, Ryan Duke wanted Bo Dukes to testify at his trial, but Bo, who was already convicted, not of murder, but of the accessory after the fact cases or charges, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and said nothing on the stand. So the jury never heard Bo's side directly at trial. The jury essentially had to weigh Ryan's word, a man who had admittedly lied before because he had confessed and now he was recanting, against the state's case built on his prior confession and some corroborating details like the DNA on the glove. The prosecution, though, they were a little bit scared, and they reminded the jury of some key facts that pointed to Ryan's guilt as the killer. First, there was Ryan's DNA on that latex glove in Tara's yard. If Ryan was never at Tara's house at all, how did his DNA get in that glove dropped right outside? Ryan's explanation was that he had been to Tara's house on a different occasion, and maybe he had left DNA on something that got transferred, but that felt like a bit of a stretch because was he saying that the GBI planted it? Maybe that's what they were saying. Second, the prosecution pointed out that Ryan's 2017 confession included details that only the killer would know. For instance, I hadn't mentioned this before, but I'll mention it now. In his confession, Ryan had said that after he initially fled Tara's house, he stopped at a payphone and called her landline to see if she would pick up. When no one answered, he knew she was dead. So he went back and picked up the body and basically got rid of her. Now, that payphone call detail was not public information, and investigators felt that that was something that only the responsible person would have known. Ryan's defense, however, countered that by saying Bo could have told him about that detail and he simply incorporated it into his false confession. Y'all, whew, it was a lot for the jury to consider. Ultimately, after deliberation, the jury reached a somewhat split decision. In May of 2022, Ryan Duke was found not guilty. Not guilty of murder, not guilty of malice murder, not guilty of felony murder, not guilty of assault, aggravated assault, not guilty of burglary. In other words, the jury did not hold him legally responsible for killing Tara. However, the jury did find him guilty of concealing Tara's death, which was one of the charges that he faced. Now, this outcome suggested that the jury believed Ryan did help cover up the crime, which he admitted on the stand, but they had reasonable doubt about whether he was the one who actually killed Tara. Perhaps Ryan's changed story, that he introduced sitting on the stand, he introduced just enough uncertainty that they couldn't be sure beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the killer. It's also possible that the lack of physical remains, meaning that there was no body, or forensic evidence tying the murder itself directly to Ryan aside from that glove, maybe that made them hesitant. Maybe that was the reasonable doubt. One juror later said in interviews that they felt Ryan's initial confession had too many inconsistencies and that the state hadn't proven the murder case firmly, especially given Bo Duke's shadow looming over the narrative. Remember, he's already a convicted felon, meaning Bo Duke's, and also he was the one who had been court-martialed for stealing military property. And also, even though they didn't know this then, but after the fact, he was convicted of 2 rapes in 2017. So, Bo Dukes is a shady character. I do want to add one more thing. I went back and I listened to an Up and Vanished episode that was recorded by a reporter who was at the trial. And she said that looking at Ryan Duke, he looked like he couldn't hurt a fly. So him sitting there in trial, he just looked like he couldn't hurt a fly. Meanwhile, she said, Bo Dukes, on the other hand, he looked like a criminal. So maybe that has something to do with how the jury voted. After the verdict, Ryan Duke was sentenced for the concealment conviction. The judge gave him the maximum, which was only 10 years in prison. But since Ryan had already been in jail for 5 years, because remember, he was arrested in 2017, and the trial happened in 2022, that time, those 5 years, counted towards his sentence. In fact, as of the sentencing, Ryan Duke had roughly 5 more years to serve, meaning that he could potentially be released around 2027 or so. I did also see on Court TV, they did report that he did have a parole hearing. I believe it was 2025, and that was denied, and that now he won't have another parole hearing, so he will just be released sometime in 2027. The judge, in delivering the 10-year sentence, did admonish Ryan, saying that every day for those 12 years that Tara's family was looking for her, he had the power to stop their pain and chose not to. The judge's words underscored how much damage the cover-up alone had done. True Crime Army, this is such a bittersweet ending. On one hand, 12 years after Tara Grinstead vanished, the people responsible for her disappearance were finally exposed, and they were held accountable at least to a certain degree. Both Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes are now convicted felons serving prison time for their roles in what happened. The cold case was officially solved in that we know the how or the who, and we know Tara's final fate. But on the other hand, no one was convicted of Tara's murder in a court of law. Legally, the act of killing Tara Grinstead remains an open question today. The prosecution believes that Ryan did it. Some in the community think Bo actually did it. It's possible that at this point, Bo and Ryan have no clue what the hell happened, and they don't know what the truth is anymore because they've just lied all these years, and they, with all the drugs and all the alcohol, they're probably confused in their own heads, which is really sad. And let's talk about Tara's poor family who sat through that trial, having to hear 2 different versions of how their daughter's life was taken. And in the end, they never got a clear answer as to why this happened at all. Another lingering question is that, what was the motive for killing Tara? Why would Ryan Duke, or Bo Dukes, if you believe Ryan's trial testimony, target Tara and target her house at all. The initial story was that Ryan intended to burglarize her home for drug money. Tara possibly caught him off guard, and it was a crime of impulse, a sudden violent reaction, not a pre-planned attack. I mean, if all of that is true, it's tragically random. Tara lost her life because she surprised a desperate thief. If Bo was the actual killer, the motive is even murkier. Bo wasn't known to have a personal connection to Tara at all. Perhaps it was similarly a burglary or an assault that turned deadly. We just don't know, and both men have reasons to lie. As Brooke Sheridan said when she asked Bo why Ryan supposedly did it, Bo answered, "That's something only God and Ryan know." I mean, that quote sticks with me because it acknowledges that we may never truly grasp the why behind this senseless act. Another sad aspect is that Tara's body was never recovered in any meaningful way. Those small fragments found in the orchard were too destroyed to even conclusively identify. Tara's family never got to bury her properly. They held a memorial service for her years ago, but they've had to make peace with never bringing her home. Tara's stepmother, Connie, said that for a long time, they held out hope that Tara was alive. They thought maybe she had been kidnapped or suffering from amnesia somewhere. I feel like in a case like this, in a case of a missing person, you always make up these, you tend to want to protect yourself. So you make up these wild stories, like maybe she bumped her head and she's living this whole other wonderful life, not realizing who she was in the past. But after hearing what happened, at least they knew that she wasn't coming back alive. And that grim certainty is its own form of closure, I suppose. Interestingly, a legal coda to this story: after Ryan's 2022 trial, prosecutors in a neighboring county, which was Ben Hill County, where the body was burned, they attempted to charge both Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes with additional crimes related to the burning of Tara's body. Essentially, they were trying to hold them further accountable for other crimes. However, in 2023, a Georgia appeals court threw those new charges out, citing the statute of limitations, saying the authorities could have charged them back, way back in 2005 when that tipster, came forward. So by 2017 and 2018, it was too late for those particular charges. Statute of limitations, typically 5 years. Now, this legal footnote highlights that some people in law enforcement might have dropped the ball early on, and now it was impossible to go back and fix that. So as it stands, the book on criminal charges in Tara's case is closed. Ryan will serve his remaining time for concealing a death, and Bo will be in prison much longer for his part in the cover-up. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, Bo managed to get himself in trouble with those rape/sexual assault charges and that conviction. And that guy just seems like a whole mess. I'm very interested now in kind of like figuring out what he stole and whether he was court-martialed in 2013, but neither is facing any further prosecution for Tara's actual murder due to those legal time limits. I will say that because Bo Dukes was never charged with murder, the prosecution can actually charge him with murder. But they have said that they believe that Ryan Duke is the actual killer, so they are not pursuing charges against Bo. But I guess anything's possible. For the town of Ocilla and Tara's friends and family, this case is one that leaves a complicated legacy. There is relief that the mystery was solved. Tara didn't just run off or disappear into thin air. There is some justice in that the people responsible were named and shamed. But there's also lingering anger and sadness that it took too long. Tara's father, Billy, sat through that trial at age 79, having waited, decades for answers. Her mother died never knowing, and many of Tara's former students grew up and went off to college, always wondering, what happened to my favorite teacher? Only to learn years later that she had been brutally murdered. It's also a case that shows the power of persistence and perhaps a bit of luck. If that podcast, Up and Vanished, hadn't refocused attention on Tara's case in 2016, who knows? Bo's girlfriend might not have felt that urgency or courage to come forward when she did. This case highlights that there are often people on the periphery of a crime who know or suspect something and just need a little push, whether that's media attention, a guilty conscience, or the right person asking the right question to break their silence. For true crime followers, the Tara Grinstead case is often cited as an example of a cold case solved by a combination of community pressure and new witnesses coming forward, rather than a case of just being solved by DNA. It's a reminder that even when a case seems hopeless, it only takes one person speaking up to crack a case wide open. Tara's disappearance rocked her small community, and her memory still lives on there. There are scholarship funds in her name for local students, and her friends describe her as vivacious, caring, and the kind of teacher who would do anything for her kids. It's painful to think how many lives she would have continued touching had she lived. By all accounts, she was on her way to an incredible career and education and had so much to offer. True Crime Army, if there's one takeaway from Tara's case, it's to never underestimate the impact of keeping a story alive. Tara's case almost faded into permanent mystery, but people refused to forget her. In the end, Tara Grinstead's loved ones got something that for years seemed impossible. They finally got answers. Not complete justice, perhaps, but answers. And sometimes in cases like this, that is the most we can hope for. True Crime Army, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening to this show. You listening and commenting and reviewing this show means the world to me. I will be bringing you a few unsolved cases very soon because, like we learned today, there is always hope to solving these cases because someone out there knows something, especially when I talk about these military community cases. Like, y'all, speak up. Now, real quick, if you love the show and you want to support it, please rate the show 5 stars. It's free, it's quick, it'll take you literally 2 seconds, if that. And if you need additional stories, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/militarymurder, where you can support this show and access up to 55 bonus episodes for as little as $5 a month. Now, these episodes, I know a lot of people are scared of Patreon because they're like, oh, Patreon, what's that? We don't want to have to do something else. But listen, once you sign up for Patreon on a web browser, go to patreon.com/militarymurder. Once you sign up, you can actually get a little link that you can, or like an RSS feed that you can input into your Apple and even into your Spotify, and it will show up automatically and you don't have to do anything extra. So you can just never go on the Patreon app after you sign up. You just go in, you get the little link and you put it in and it'll come up on your regular feed for real. It is absolutely amazing. All right, everyone. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of. So remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Shh, Mama's working on her podcast.
I don't want to.